Samantha from the Makespace. You can find more patterns at www.themakespace.uk. In today's video, we're going to be sewing the Half-pint Hobo, which is a great smaller hobo bag when you don't want to carry too much, or for the smaller members of your family. It's a fairly quick sew. You don't need too much hardware, but it does use this brilliant bridge anchor. You might find it called an arch strap anchor, so that you can have these minimal lines on the front, and then 3 swivel clips and 2 triangle rings, and that's it. The flap just hooks into that bridge anchor at the bottom there, and the flap is double-sided, so you can choose whether to have your matching fabric on the flap and the exterior, or contrast, that's up to you. And then inside we've got a slip pocket. Oh, turn it around so you can see it. There we go, a slip pocket, and also a zip pocket. Obviously you can modify this bag for your own needs, add extra pockets, add extra hardware, add whatever you like. You can also change the handle out for a long crossbody strap if you'd prefer, or you can just change this out to a rectangle shape, which makes it much quicker if you're making them in a production line or for fair or market or as gifts. So just wanted to show you the size on me. So it just fits nice and snug under your arm like that. The shoulder the holder is sort of a shoulder pad size, and just sits really nice and comfortable on the shoulder there, and then it just slots in under your arm. You can make the handle slightly longer if you need to, or as I said, you can make it into a crossbody strap instead. I've got 2 versions here. I've got one out of the faux leather and then one out of all cotton. You can see the one out of the all cotton is a lot slouchier, a lot more relaxed shape. So you can add extra stabilizer into that, or you can just embrace that slouchy hobo shape. Why don't you gather your materials together and let's get sewing. We'll start by adding our stabilizer. So I've added my interfacing to the wrong side of all of my pieces. I've even added it to my faux leather. It doesn't really need it, but there is a little bit of stretch in my faux leather. So I've just added the interface, and it gives it a little bit more stability as well, a little bit more stiffness. Now, the faux leather I'm using is the Mora from sewhot.co.uk, and I haven't been sponsored, so but you can pin through it and the holes do disappear with heat, although I'm pinning inside the seam allowance anyway. So I'm just smoothing my faux leather over the fleece. If you'd like a little bit more stiffness, you can always swap to a foam or add a bit of Decaville light in between your layers. But I find on this bag, because it's supposed to be a little bit slouchy, the fleece is enough. I've got a few too many pins here. Add some of these back before I end up causing myself mischief. Okay, so I'm going to stitch on my longest stitch length, which for me is number 6. And I'm going to sew using a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, because my regular seam allowance is 3/8 inch or 1 centimetre. So I'm starting with my needle down so that I can adjust my hands as I need to. And I'm just going to sew around all 4 sides just to baste this stabiliser into place. And actually I think my stabiliser is slightly too small, so it's going to be a bit loose on one side, but that's okay. This basting stitching is mainly just to hold it in place during construction while we make the bag. And then the construction stitches should hold it together. So as I'm coming up to these corners, I'm stopping with my needle down and I'm lifting my presser foot and pivoting, and then lower my presser foot, and I can carry on sewing then. So I'm going around all 4 edges back to where I started. And trim these threads off. Okay. Now on the wrong side of this, I just want to trim that stabiliser, that fleece, back to the stitches so that I can reduce how much stabiliser is in my seams. So I've got it on the wrong side and I'm pulling back the vinyl, the faux leather, and then with my scissors almost completely horizontal, just trimming that excess foam back away as close to the stitches as I can get without going over them. My machine is strong, so I can go through this, but it does add a bit of extra bulk into your side seams, I find, so I do like to trim it back even though my machine can handle it. Okay, so just trim that extra bit there. So you're going to do that for both of your main panels and your handle and your flap. I've done both my main panels and my handle, but I haven't done my flap because I'm going to show you a different way of adding your fleece when we come to the flap. Okay, so I can pop those to one side for the minute. Those are interfaced and stabilized. They can go to one side. Okay, oh no, hang on, I forgot we need to cut our bottom corners. Okay, so we are going to cut 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, or 3.8 centimeters by 3.8 centimeters away from these bottom corners. So I'm just lining up my ruler here and marking those. In fact, a larger ruler would be a lot easier, wouldn't it? Let's use the larger ruler, just so I can make sure I'm completely accurate. If you've got directional fabric, make sure that you're cutting these out of your bottom corners. Okay, so make sure you've got your fabric the right way, and your fabric needs to be wider than it is tall. So I've marked that on one piece, and I'm going to try to trim these two together so that they match as much as possible. No, it's too thick. Too thick, never mind. It was worth a try, wasn't it? I'll cut that square out. And the other side. You can do this before you baste your fleece on, but I just think it's so much quicker to baste the fleece on before you cut your corners. Right, I'll layer these up then and trace around the corner. So that they are sort of matching-ish, as close as I can get them. Hang on though, that doesn't look quite right. Let's double check. That one's correct. And then let's just double check this one. No, that one's not quite right. There we go. There we go, that was a close one, wasn't it? So in an attempt to make everything matching, I nearly had a bit of an error on my hands there. There we go. Okay, lovely. Let's do the lining pieces as well. I've layered all my pieces up for so that they're in the correct order. So I'll just do, no, I will do both together. There we go. I was too organised, that's what it was. And these two, hopefully I should be able to do together because it's just cotton. So I'll layer those up, draw my squares. These ones could be cut before now, I suppose, whilst you're doing your cutting out. Or later, in fact, you could just do them later if you're a little bit forgetful like me. Yeah, I can cut those together, that's fine. There we go. There we go, lovely. Okay, so they can, one of those can go away. We're going to use one now. So we need one lining main panel and 1 pocket piece. I'm doing mine out of the same fabric, so I will try and keep it interfacing side up where I can, so that you can see what I'm doing with it and where it's going. Now we need to mark our centres. So I'm just folding in half to find the centre point. And marking it there, and then I can add a pin because it's going to be very difficult to see a centre mark on this fabric, I think, because it's so busy. So I'll add a pin. There we go. Oh, beautiful. Now I need to find the centre of my pocket piece as well, just so everything's lined up nice and neat and centred. On this one, I do like things to be centred. I know I like things to be slightly wonky and squiffy on some of them, but this one I think is better, mostly centred. Right, so I'm going to pop my interface pocket piece in the middle of the lining main panel, and I've got them right sides together. And then I'm going to pop this 4.5 inches or 11.5 centimetres from the bottom edge, make sure it's all nicely centred, and pin it into place. So let's find the centre with my ruler, and then the centre of the pocket can match up there. I'll add a pin either side just to hold this in place for the minute. And then I need to mark my, oh hang on though, I've got directional fabric. So if you've got directional fabric like me, you're going to want to put this upside down. So my squirrels are facing upside down at the moment. And then when you look into your pocket, on the back edge, the bit that you see when you look into your zipped pocket, they'll be the right way up at least. Okay. Now we're going to draw a box on the pocket piece, and we're going to pop it 4 inches or 10 centimetres from the bottom. Let's find our centre. There's the centre. And we are going to make it 6 inches long, apparently. I say that as though I didn't write this. It's been a while since I wrote it. It's been through the testers since then. 1, 2, 3. So I'll go 3 inches from the centre that way, 3 inches from the centre that way, and then 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre tall. If you'd like to upgrade your pockets, you absolutely can. If you want to do one with a facing or different kind of pockets or pouches and all sorts, you absolutely can. This is your bag. But for now, we're just going to add a simple zip pocket to this one. Okay, I'm going to add another couple of pins down here just to keep that stabilised slightly more. Now I'm going to sew around the outside of this box, and I'm going to start here-ish, and I'm going to sew to the corner, and then the same as I did for my basting stitches, I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift the presser foot and pivot, and sew all the way around. I'm going to change my stitch length down to my normal construction stitch length, and if you find that you can't quite get into these corners, then stop where you can, decrease your stitch length down to the smallest one you can, and just kind of nibble away into that point so that you can get right into that corner, and then you can pivot just to make sure it's nice and accurate. Okay, so I'm sewing directly on the outside line of this box, and there's no need to backstitch because I'm going to overlap my stitches slightly. You can backstitch if you like, but I prefer to overlap my stitches. Okay, so I'm directly on that corner there. So I've pivoted, and I'm directly on that corner there. This could be a brilliant start. If it continues this way, I might have to rethink my policy of buying lottery tickets. Oh, again, third one accurately in the place. Either that or I need to remember that stitch length number 2 is the exact stitch length. Oh, not quite. Okay, so just decrease my stitch length down, taking another little stitch so I can get into the corner, pivoted back to my normal number 2 and overlapped a few stitches there. Oh, got the biggest scissors in history. Okay, so we'll just trim these threads and I can take these pins out then. And then what we're going to do, we're going to cut along that centre line and into the arms of each of these triangles here. So to start it, I'm going to use my rotary cutter. Be very, very careful if you use a rotary cutter on this one, because you don't want to go too far. And then I can use my scissors just to snip right to the end of that line and then up each arm of the triangles. Make sure you don't go through the stitches in the corners, but you do want to go as close as you can, because that's what will give you a nice neat finish. Okay. There we go, there's just a couple of threads still connected there. See if I can snip into those. There we go, lovely. Right, now what do we need? Now I need my little pressing board, so I'll put my pins to one side because they're sure to go flying if I catch them. Get my little ironing board up. Now the first thing I'm going to do is press this flat. I'm going to add a little spritz of water. I've only got a tiny iron, so I haven't really got very good steam on it, so I like to use a little spritz of water and then add my iron. So a good bit of steam in there, and I'm just very delicately pressing on that. And then I'm pushing, pull your pocket piece back and push against that line of stitches that we've sewn. And then the same in the opposite direction. So from the top, pull the top down and push against that line of stitches. Like so. And then on the end there and the other end. And it looks a little bit messy inside, but that's okay because you are going to get creases. When you do a zip pocket like this, you are going to get creases, but by pressing it in this way, you're guaranteeing that those creases are on the inside. So we've pressed that really well. We're going to push this through to the back, like so. Pull it out nice and neat. Now the temptation is to press it from this side first, but resist that temptation and turn it back to the right side and give that a little finger press. And then we can go in and give it a press with our iron. A nice steam press if you've got good steam on your iron. And then the same on the bottom edge. Make sure everything's nice and flat, and you can use your fingers to roll that seam out. Make sure it's nice and neat. Like so. Okay. And then we know that that's really nice and neat in there, and any creases are hidden on the inside. I probably can't see this right now, but there's a nice big crease there and there. So the creases are inevitable, but it's not inevitable where they form. So you can be in charge of where they form. Okay, lovely. Put my iron to one side for the moment and move my board. Leave that to cool down a second. Now you need a zip. You should have a nice zip to go in your lining. I've got a nice pink zip. There we go. I figured a nice bit of pink would be okay on this one. Just double check that my zip actually works as a zip. And then we need some double-sided basting tape. and we're going to add it to the top and bottom edges of this box opening that we've sewn. Nice little bit on the top there. Make sure to push that down really well so it is really nice and secure there. And a bit on the bottom as well. Pop that back in my bag just to make sure it doesn't dry out. There we go. Now my zip is slightly longer than it needs to be, but that's okay because that means I can centre it and then take off, trim away the stoppers, which is quite nice. Right. Let me open my zip slightly before I pop it in. Oh look, I could actually, there's a nice big zip. I could line it up like so. Now you want this centered in the box, so what I'm going to do is just gently pop it into place and then turn over and reposition, because of course it's very wonky. Oh dear, I thought I'd done quite well then as well. There we go. Make sure my pearl is inside the box. There we go, that's a bit better. Right, now we're going to sew this into place. Make sure your pocket is still nice and open on the back, nice and flat. I'm going to start down here-ish and I'm going to sew around the outside of the box using an 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance, or slightly closer if you can get it neatly without going off the edge. I'm going to use a slightly longer stitch length just so it looks slightly neater. Although you shouldn't be able to see it on this fabric because it's nice and busy. Right, I'll just get my threads to the back and pop this under the presser foot. There we go. So I'm going to start with my needle down again and I'm going to sew until I get near that zip pull. I've left my thread tails long, I haven't back stitched, so I'm lifting my presser foot and I can move my zip pull out of the way, lower my presser foot and carry on, and then lift my presser foot and pivot, lower the presser foot, sew along the end, lift my presser foot, pivot, and around all 4 sides I'm going to go. And as I'm coming close to my zip pull again, lift my presser foot, move the zip pull out of the way, lower the presser foot and carry on. Oh, I've just lost my pin for my centre mark, so I'll have to pop that back in again. Okay, so I'm going back to where I started. And I can pull that out. Just trim my thread tails. Let's pop this centre pin back in before I forget. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just have a little gentle tug on these threads on the back here, and a little loop will form, and you can pull on that little loop and that will pull that top thread through to the back in theory. I've slightly overlapped one of them there, so I might have to feed that through from the front. There's nothing worse than trying to find a needle, thread that needle and pull a thread through to the back than when you're filming a video or you've got an audience. So if I suddenly cut, you know it all went disastrously wrong. Okay, it didn't go disastrously wrong, so that's good. So I thread my thread, or pull my thread through to the back, and then I can tie these off. So I'm just going to tie little Just very simple knots. It's on the back, inside your pocket. So in theory, nobody should see it. And if they do see it, then they need to be answering questions as to why they're looking inside your pocket. I didn't get these close enough to tie them off together. If I do get them close enough to tie them off together, then I separate them into 2 and 2, sort of tie all 4 together, but I didn't, so that's okay. So we've got 2 knots in the back there. Lovely. Now before I go any further, I'm going to trim these stoppers off of my zip, cut it down to size, just so I don't have to worry about those when I'm sewing the rest of it together. And then with my zip pull in the middle-ish, I can fold my top of my pocket down to meet the bottom of my pocket. There will be a little sort of pleat at the top there, or a nice little fold. Okay, there's a little bit of extra space at the top there on the pocket. That's what I'm trying to describe. Okay, so don't pull it all the way down, because that's going to pull on your lining then when you put anything in the pocket. Instead, make your top edge match your bottom edge. Right, lovely. So I'm going to leave a turning gap in the bottom of my zip pocket, and that's where we're going to turn the bag through later. I better double check actually in the pattern that that is what we're supposed to be doing before I do that. Yes, absolutely, that's good. Always safest to double check, isn't it, before I steam ahead. Okay, so I'm going to sew around this pocket. I'm going to start at the top here with a back stitch with my regular seam stitch length. I'm going to sew down to here and do back stitching again. So from here to here will be normal stitch length with back stitching at the top and the bottom. And then across here, I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my longest stitch length and sew across there with a basting stitch. And then I'm going to decrease back down to my normal stitch length and back stitch up the side and back stitch again. So I'll have back stitching at the top either side and the bottom either side, normal stitch length along the sides here, and a long basting stitch along the bottom. We're only going through the pocket layers, so you can either sew this with your lining pulled back out of the way like this, or you can flip it over like this and pull it back and sew along there. I think I'm going to do that because it's easiest for me to see. So I'm going to start with my needle down. Let's check my stitch length. Yeah, back stitch. Move my pin pop before I knock that. So to the corner, needle down, lift, press a foot and pivot, and then some back stitches here. Increase to my basting stitch length. Oh, could go a little bit further actually. And go down to my normal stitch length. And pivot. And back up the other side. And back stitch again. And can trim these threads. Trim them as we go, nice and neat. And take these pins out. There we go. So in theory now we should have a zip pocket that works, and my squirrels, oh, I haven't actually got any squirrels in the pocket piece. However, if, oh no, I've got a little birdie. That sort of counts, doesn't it? But so that is the right way up, and lovely. Now I'm going to leave that fully open, and I'm going to leave my basting stitches in. We will press those later and remove them, but for the minute I'm going to leave them in just to keep that nice and neat and secure. Okay, we can pop that to one side now, and then we're going to get our other pocket piece. I'm just going to have a little drink while I try and find my pocket piece. There it is. Okay, so with this taller than it is wide, I'm going to fold this in half, right sides together. Add a couple of pins. I've got a little scrap of fabric there. Don't know where that came from. You can make as many slip pockets as you like and whatever size you like as well. So if you want to add extra pockets to this bag, you can. Now we are going to sew in a very similar way to what we did the zip pocket. We're going to start up here with a basting stitch and our normal stitch length. Then we're going to sew all the way down here, back stitch again, baste across here with our longest stitch length, go back down to our normal stitch length and baste here, back stitch here, and then sew all the way up to top again, back stitch. So we'll have back stitching at the top and the bottom, normal stitch length here, regular construction stitch length, and then basting stitch along the bottom. Okay, I'm going to start off with my back stitching and pivot and back stitching, increase my stitch length and decrease my stitch length and back stitch. And one more, pivot to the top and back stitch. Okay. There we go, lovely. And I can take my pins out. And then we're going to trim some of this excess fabric off of the corners. So what we're going to do is snip straight across and then again further into the seam allowance, and then as far into seam allowance as you like in those top corners. So straight across and a bit extra, and then in the top corners a little bit extra there. Okay, that just reduces that bulk and that strain on those top corners. Now we need our iron again. I'm wondering whether I can get away with my tiny little sleeve board for this. I'll give that a little press along those basting stitches. That should leave us a nice little line of stitch holes to follow. So I'm going to remove those basting stitches now, and we should see, as we're removing those, a little line of stitch holes that's being left behind. Okay, and we'll take that out the back as well. Lovely, nice and neat. And then we'll turn this through that turning gap if I can get hold of it. Lovely. Now if you've got directional fabric like me, you probably want the design to be facing the right way on the front, so just bear that in mind when you're doing your pressing. Oh yeah, my birds are on the right way up this side, and I've got an upside down scribble on the back side. I'm going to use the blunt end of a spoon just to pop those corners out. I really could have done with my proper ironing board here, but we'll make do with a sleeve board because it takes up much less space. So I've just pressed one side, so I've finger rolled it out and then given it a press, and then the other short edge, finger roll and give it a press, and I'm pressing on the side that I want to be the right side of my pocket, so with the birds facing the right way up. And then just tuck those seam allowances in to the turning gap under nice and neat. Give that a little press. And then I can sort of smooth it out and press the top edge. Okay. Lovely. That would have been so much easier with my actual slightly bigger ironing board, but never mind. Okay, just gonna pin that bottom turning gap to hold it in place because I haven't pressed it properly with my proper ironing board, and I'm going to top stitch along this top folded edge. So I'm going to increase my stitch length slightly to make it slightly neater, and I'll just go all the way along the top using an 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. All the way along, there we go. And so that my top stitching doesn't come unravelled, because I haven't back stitched, I just tie these threads into a little knot. Now if you want to use a contrast fabric for your slip pocket, it looks really, really nice on your lining fabric, and it gives it a little, just a little pop, a little extra boost. On this occasion I've used the same fabric as my lining. If you have got a contrast, then that would look really nice. Okay, so here's my second lining main panel. Let's mark the centres of this. I've put my pencil somewhere. There it is, my little trolley. Isn't that the trouble? I think sewing is 50% sewing and 50% looking for what you've just had in your hand a minute ago. I'm not sure I've got those in the right place. Let's just double check. Yes. Oh, I have. There we go. And I'll add some pins the same as before, just to make sure that I keep track of where that centre is. This is a lovely, lovely quick bag to make compared to some of my patterns, so it makes a good gift, I find. Right, so let's have a little look at the pattern where we're supposed to place this. So we are going to pop it 2.5 inches from the bottom, or 6.4 centimetres, and I want to make sure that my centre of my lining is lined up with the centre of my pocket. I'll just fold that in half and get the centre. There we go, nice and neat. Okay. I'm just going to add some pins to this to make sure it's staying in place. Use some white pins so I can see what I'm doing. And if you'd like to divide it up the centre, then now is a great time to do that. I'm going to use my white chalk so that I can see it. That should rub out afterwards then. So to sew this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start at this top corner of the pocket and back stitch. I'm going to use my the same stitch length as I used to top stitch the pocket. So I'm going to back stitch here, sew down the side, stop with my needle down and pivot, sew along the bottom to my centre line, up the centre line and back stitch. Then I'm going to pivot and sew back down that centre line, same again, pivot, sew to the corner, pivot, back up to the top and back stitch. So I'll have back stitching at the top, either side and in the centre, and then regular stitches down the side and the bottom, and that's going to close that turning gap there as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with my needle down again so that I can pivot and readjust my hands how I need to. Couple of back stitches and sew down to this bottom corner, needle down, lift the presser foot and pivot, and then I'm sewing along the bottom to that centre line, and I'm not quite there, so I'm just going to decrease my stitch length, there we go, to get to where I needed to go, change back up, and I'm sewing up the centre line, couple of back stitches, lift the press foot and pivot, back down the centre line to the bottom, press the foot and pivot, and I'm closing this turning gap as I'm sewing, and I'm back to the corner so I can lift the presser foot and pivot. And then back up to the top and some back stitches again. Lovely, there we go. My thread is so lovely matched that it's really hard to see, which is great if you go a little bit wonky, but a bit tricky for trimming the excess threads. There we go. Right, that's our pockets done. The next thing we're going to do is sew the lining main panels together. So get your lining main panel that's got the zip, and then we'll sew those together. Right, so I've got both of my lining main panels, and we'll pop them right sides together. Make sure your zip is still open. And I'm lining up my corner cutouts and all of my edges. And then I'm going to pin those together. Pin at the edges first to make sure that they stay in place, and then everything else should, in theory, come together. Okay, lovely. Now we're going to sew along the side edges. We're going to start with our normal seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or a centimetre at the top, and then after about an inch or 2.5 centimetres we're going to taper out to a larger seam allowance. Okay, I've got both my lining main panels and I've popped them right sides together. My zip is still open on my zip pocket, and then matching up all of the corner cutouts, the sides, the edges, etc. Pin those together, right sides together. So we've got our interface in there. Then we're going to start sewing at a top edge, either top edge is fine. We're going to start sewing with our usual seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch, and then after about an inch or 2.5 centimetres we're going to taper out to a larger seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch or 1.6 centimetres. So we're going to sort of go out to a larger seam allowance and then back in, so that at the end we finish up on that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So the top and the bottom is 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then in the middle is that larger seam allowance, and then we'll sew the bottom edge with our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm using my regular construction stitch length. If you find it helpful to mark the seam allowance on your lining, you can do so. It doesn't really matter about being fully accurate as long as the top and the bottom are that 3/8 of an inch. Mine is slightly freehand. I just take that extra bulk out of the seam allowance there. I'll sew my second side next, and then I'll do my bottom. We're leaving those bottom corner cutouts being left unsewn. Okay. We're leaving those open at the bottom. So I've sewn my sides, and then the bottom we're just sewing in a completely straight line with our seam allowance along the entire bottom, back stitching at the start and the end of every seam here. There we go. Okay, now we've got our turning gap in the bottom of our pocket, but if you're using fabrics that are really thick and you're not convinced that that's going to be big enough, then you can always leave an extra turning gap in the bottom of the lining as well. That's okay, just to help you turn through, and you can always close that through the turning gap in the zip pocket, or you could just leave it in the lining and turn it through that way. Okay, so what I would like to do is press these seam allowances open, at least at the top and the bottom. So I'm going to get my proper, oh no I'm not, I'm going to use my sleeve board for this actually, because that will be quite handy, being able to pop that inside. See, there I was thinking that my sleeve board was a lazy option, but in this case it's a good option. So I'm going to press these seam allowances open as much as I can. It will just help your seams sit really nice and neat inside then. Just press those open. Just manipulating that so that it sits as open and flat as possible where I want it to. And the same on the other side. There we go. Sometimes you've just got to give it a little bit of a tug to get into place. I just want these seam allowances nice and neat. And that's what we're doing here by pressing them open. It means that they will sit nice and neat, exactly where you want them to. Now for the bottom seam allowance, not quite so easy. So I'm just going to fold one edge back and give it a little press. And if you've got faux leather or vinyl and you can't press it, then what I would do is open the seam allowances, like here on the side, and just baste across that open seam allowance just to keep it open. You won't be able to do all the way down the sides and to the bottom. It will keep them open where you need them to be open. So I've turned this bottom seam over and I'm just pressing that back so that in the end that is nice and open. Right, pop my sleeve board away, my tiny iron. Now we're going to open this out, match our side seams to our bottom seams, make sure that that seam matches perfectly there. And then I'll add a pin. And we're going to sew across these to form our boxed corners. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to use, what seam allowance am I using? I'm using the regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance on these. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end of these box corners. And the same on the other side. Make sure that's nice and flattened out. And back stitch the other end. Okay. Okay, lovely. Okay. Now I think I've got an extra pin in here, I could feel it. I think that's it though for pins, and that's the lining of my bag complete. I don't know if you can see that or if it's a little bit dark. I've added my maker's label in there, which shows up really well against this dark fabric, so that's good. So you can pop your lining to one side and we'll continue with the rest of the bag. So moving on to the flap, and I'm going to show you a different way to add your stabiliser, just in case you're particularly lazy like me. I was going to add it into the pattern and then I thought no, it's probably too lazy, so I didn't, but I thought I'd still show it to you just because it is a bit of a time saver. And if you've got scraps that are, you know, they're not particularly massive, so you don't want to, you know, necessarily save any fabric, but you don't want to be too wasteful. So what you do is you pop your stabiliser down and then your exterior fabric on top like you would normally. We're going to skip a step though. Rather than sew it and then cut it out and then add the lining. I'm going to add my lining now on top. And this way I'm going to leave the top end open, but that's okay. Oh, I think I might have to change my pin round so it's facing the right way. We're basically just going to sew our seam and then trim it afterwards all in one. And one of my testers did this and asked why I hadn't done it, and I said, oh, because I thought it was me being lazy, which is why I didn't do it. Right, so I'm going to sew using my regular construction stitch length, and I'm going to sew using the regular construction seam allowance. I'm going to start at the top here and back stitch, so all the way round, down along the bottom, up and back up to the other top. Okay, however, on this one, and this is something that I do find is helpful, I like to mark my seam allowance on these bits where the corners are and the curves, just so you can make sure that they're accurate and even on both sides, because the last thing we want is one side down here and one side up here. So I do like to mark my seam allowance, so I'm marking 3/8 of an inch, just doing little dots and then connecting them. Another one there, just so I can connect it up, I think. And in theory, yeah, those are matching. I've just drawn a line across to make sure that they are nice and even. Okay, don't use a pencil or a pen if it's going to be seen through your fabric. Mine's nice and dark, so it's not going to be seen. Okay, so it just means that when I get to that point where it intersects, I can stop my needle down and pivot and know that that's when I need to go down, and the same on this side. Okay, so oh, I've thought of an issue here. I can't see my seam allowance. Oh dear, that's why I didn't do it. I'll just mark my seam allowance on here. That's why I did it all separately, although it's much easier to do it in one and just mark your seam allowance. Just very quickly whiz through and add some dots on my seam allowance. So if you follow the pattern, then you've already done your stabiliser anyway. And you can fast forward me while saying, come on Samantha, sort it out. There we go. And I'll just mark it on the bottom here, make sure I'm nice and accurate. Nice neat square, don't we, at the bottom. There we go. Okay, there we go. So it probably was quicker to sew it separately, but it makes me feel more efficient. So I'm going to start at the top here and back stitch. Maybe one day the sewing machine manufacturers will invent a 3/8 of an inch foot. Although I think a lot of them have only just done 1/4 of an inch foot, so that's no good. Right, so I've hit that point, I've pivoted. I can sew down and do this square bit at the end. And across the bottom. Pivot, and then oh no, once I hit that point, that's when it's time to pivot and sew around the curve. That should be nice and accurate then, or not accurate, even, nice and even across both sides. And back up to the top and back stitch. Okay, and trim my threads. Right, so now I can trim the stabiliser back all the way from this entire flap, which does reduce the bulk slightly more. It does give you a slightly neater finish. Just trimming as much of that out of the seam allowance as possible. And round the curve. I don't know if it's quicker. Could be slightly more long-winded, couldn't it? But makes me feel efficient. Okay, then we're going to cut across the corners, straight across, and same as we did before, a little bit more in, although on the end here I could just trim all of that away as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to swap over to my pinking shears and do these curves with my pinking shears. If you haven't got pinking shears, then you can notch into these curves just to help that sit nice and neat when it's turned through the right side. And going back. And then in these inside corners here, I'm just gonna do a little snip, try and find my slightly stronger scissors, and just take a triangle out of that corner. And that sort of reduces the strain or the stress on that corner and helps it sit really neat. Okay, lovely, maybe a little bit more there. Okay, so we should now be able to turn this through. I've got 3 pairs of scissors and shears and a pin for a little tidy up. Okay, put those over that side, otherwise I'll go for them and they won't be in the right place. So we should now be able to turn this right side out, and it is a little bit of a wiggle, so take your time on this. It helps if you sort of roll that main part up. Push it through, there we go. Once you've got that bulk through, it does come out nicely then. And well, that's not quite there yet, nearly there. I'll just get my spoon. I can use the end of the spoon just to encourage that end out. You don't want to go through your corners, so don't be too rough on it, but you do want them to sit out nice and neat. And then I'll just run that around the inside of the curves to help it sit nice and neat. Can also finger roll that into place so that it gives you that nice curve. Oh, beautiful. Okay, now if you're using all cotton, then do give it a good press. If you're using faux leather, give it a cautious press. Might add a little bit of steam, a little bit of water. And just literally just to get those edges out nice and neat. Okay, lovely. Okay. Now my corner's not quite all the way turned out there, so let's see if I can get right into that corner. That's better. Now have a think about which way you want your flap to be. So on one of mine, I've done it where the lining side is the exterior, is the right side out on the flap, as a little contrast on my fabric. So you could have it that your flap is that way round on your fabric, or you can have it matching. It's your choice. I think I'm going to go for matching on this side this time. So I'm going to sew top stitch on the vinyl side, on the faux leather side. So as this goes under my presser foot, I'm just making sure that the lining is tucked round to the back there. Let's start with my needle down and just take your time around these curves. And then lift the presser foot and pivot where you need to. Just take your time. I mean, I'm talking mostly to myself at this point when I say take your time. I do have a tendency to rush. Okay, so I think looking at that, that's pretty even. I could have drawn the seam allowance on again, same as I did before. And then follow those curves round, nice and steady. There we go, lovely. Okay, so even after you've top stitched, you can still change your mind. I think I've changed my mind. I think I'm going to do mine with the line inside out, actually. Just for a bit of variety. Right, so we'll add our hook now, and you can either add it with the foldy over bit on the lining side, or on the other side, the exterior side, and then you can also choose which way up you have your flap on your bag. So it's up to you really. I think I'm going to go with, no, that's not right. Took a bit of brain power there. I'm going to have mine folded up to the lining side there. Just pin that into place so that stays nice and neat. And then you've got the choice. You can either sew one line of stitching across here, two lines, you could do a little box, you can add rivets. It's up to you really what you do. I'm just going to sew, I don't know what I'm going to sew. I'm just going to sew one line across the top, I think. And I've still got the same stitch length, so it should match pretty well. Now on this, I do want to back stitch, because I want to be sure that that is nice and secure. And then I'm going to pivot and sew back over that same line. And do you know, a rivet would look very, very nice on there. I might end up adding a rivet later on down the line. Okay, so there's my flap. Very nice. And then I'm going to add this onto one of my main panels, whichever main panel you want to be the back. Okay. So I've decided that my lining is going to be the right side or the front of my flap. So I'm going to pop that face down on top of my faux leather, except I need to find my centres. So I'll find my centre first. There we go. And then line up my flap on top. Like so. And I think a clip is probably best for this one. So I'm going to baste this into place, along that top. It's going to be sewn in on the seam as well, so don't panic too much. You don't want to put too many holes in your vinyl or faux leather if you're using vinyl. So I've just done a little back stitch, based across, and a little back stitch the other end. Okay, now just hold that into place while we're sewing. I do like those fabrics together. I think they go quite well. I think that's a good choice. Right, so that one can go to one side for the moment. We need our other main panel, exterior main panel, and this is the one we want to be on the front of the bag. So we'll find our centres. Of course, if you'd followed the pattern, you would have done this in step, I don't know, step 1, step 2, I think, but I'm very, very bad at following the instructions when it says to find the centre. And I always, despite my best intentions, I always seem to end up doing it at this point. Right, so now we need our bridge anchor. You might find that this is called an arch strap anchor. And similar. Mine are from Emmeline Bags. So they're called bridge anchors. And I need my screwdriver, and it's very handy, see, because in my pattern I've put what colour screwdriver I've used so that I can come back and just pick out the right one straight away. And mine's got a little magnet with it so that I can magnetise the end of the screwdriver. But if you end up getting the same set as me, you can just go by whichever colour is in the image, and that's the right size screwdriver to use. I find things are best when colour coded for me. Let's take these screws out and separate this. So this comes with 4 screws and the actual bridge anchor and the washer plate. So I'm going to pop my screws to one side for the moment, and the bridge anchor, I'm just going to use the washer for the moment. So I need to line this up using my ruler, and I think it's probably at this point that I realise I should have brought up a hole punch as well. Yes, so I might have to mark this and then go and find a hole punch. Okay, so we're going 3 inches or 7.5 centimetres from the bottom. You can actually move it down as far as 2 inches from the bottom if you like a slouchier look. So the back washer is 1.5 inches, so it needs to overlap the centre by 3/4 of an inch each side. Lovely, so that should be nice and centred, and I'll draw on these 4 holes, and then I will go and find a hole punch because I failed to prepare. Oh dear. I wonder if I can add a bit of chalk to these as well, just for it to show up a little bit easier on this dark faux leather. Let's try that. Yeah, lovely. Okay, right, nobody breathe and smudge the chalk, and I'm going to go and find a hole punch and punch some holes, and I'll be right back. Right, I have hole punched, found my hole punch, done my hole punching, all good. Now we're going to insert our bridge anchor, and this is a little bit fun to do because you've got the bulk of the bridge obviously on the front. So we just want to test that through our holes, check our holes are big enough, and if they're not, which mine are not, just add a little something through the holes and give it a little wiggle just to grow those slightly, very gently, don't overdo it. And then in theory those sticky out bits on the bridge anchor should fit through those holes. And I just want to give it a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of a wiggle on the back to make sure that they are nestled snugly in through the holes. Is that nestled? Nearly nestled. Nearly nestled. And one more. There's a little, there we go. Perfect. Now, what I like to do with these is just double check that that's nice and straight. It is nice and straight. And then all that work I'm going to undo by taking it off and adding a dab of glue. Although I think my lid is stuck. So that's very good. Whoops. I'd like to say I'm really well prepared today, but I suspect you might not believe me, even though I am actually really well prepared. But, oh dear, didn't really... Oh, there we go. Okay. I've obviously not used this glue up in the filming room for a little while. It's kind of got itself all stuck together around the neck, I think. Right, start again. So I'm just going to undo that slightly and add a good little dollop of glue in the middle. And I don't want to add too much because I don't want it to splurt everywhere. Okay, and because we took that time to do the wiggling first, that's just gone straight back into those holes. And if you want to, you can just double check on the back and encourage them back into those holes. Like so. You can leave this to set, or you can add your washer plate now and your screws. So I think I'm going to add my washer plate and my screws because I'm fairly confident that that's all good. Just add these. And it is very pretty on the back, this bridge anchor, but as it is, it will be inside my bag this time, so it won't be seen. Although it is good to know that these ones do have pretty backs if it is going to be seen. Right, so that is nice and secure on there. Nice bit of bling as well. Now it's up to you. You can either add a dab of glue onto the back here or a bit of tape. I'm going to add a little bit of tape just to make sure that those screws don't come undone. I could, of course, have added a dab of glue into each screw hole before I screwed them in. And that's something that you can do if you know that the recipient is going to be particularly rough on it. But I'm just adding a bit of tape and that should help them not come unscrewed. Okay, lovely. There we go. So that's the front of our bag, and let me put let's have a little tidy up for a second. And then we need the back of our bag, which is the one with the flap attached, and we're going to pop those right sides together. Okay, so inside there we've got our flap sandwiched and the bridge anchor sandwiched. I'm lining up the centres and the cutouts, and of course we've got that little bit of bulk in there with the bridge anchor, so it might not line up exactly, or it might not sit exactly flat, but as long as everything lines up at the sides and the edges, that's all we're interested in really. And we're going to sew the sides and the bottoms. This time though, unlike on the lining, this time we're going to be sewing using the same seam allowance for the sides and the bottom. There we go. Okay, we're going to leave these corner cutouts open the same as we did before. I'm going to sew down the side, back stitch at the start and the end, along the bottom, back stitch at the start and the end, and along the other side, back stitch at the start and the end. We're using our regular stitch length and our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Oh, my foot pedal got stuck under my counter there. There we go. So I'm leaving that corner cutout open and back stitch. And just be aware of your hardware coming through there. Don't let your seam go wonky because of that coming through. It's nowhere near your foot, but obviously your hand is pressing on it. Okay. Right, let's trim these threads. Now I'm not going to risk pressing my seam allowances open on this. If you're using something that can be pressed, then I would encourage you to press those seam allowances open because it will make it much neater. However, on the top edges, I'm just going to open these seam allowances, and I am going to baste these open because then it will make it easier to sew my strap tabs on afterwards. So all I'm doing is within the seam allowance, literally just sewing across those seam allowances there to keep them open. You can do that for the bottom ones and the base as well if you like, but I'm going to try and just press the foot down. Going to try and just hold them open as I sew. Right, lovely. Okay, let's trim those threads. Now we can box the bottom of our bag, so the same as we did before. So match up those seam lines on the side and the bottom. And those, press those open or keep those open as best you can. I always put 3 on, but you can never really use 3 clips because you need space to get started on the seam. So I'm not sure quite why I do, but I do. I guess it's habit, isn't it? I'll match up this side. I always put one right in the centre, and then one either side. Let's leave one off for the minute. So we're just going to sew across here using that same regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to try and keep my seam allowances open as I go. And I've got a little pair of scissors here that I can use to hold them open so I don't have to risk my fingers if I need to hold them. I managed that pretty well actually that time, so that's good. I keep getting orange threads. I'm not quite sure where they're coming from. I think they might be under my machine somewhere. Should probably clear my counter, have a little clean down. Okay, so needle down, back stitch. Sew across. And back stitch. There you go. Lovely. Right, I've got a stray pin in the bottom centre there and in the tops here. Okay, so I'm just going to double check these boxed corners look nice and neat. If you find that it's pulling or a bit gappy, then go back and add a second line of stitching inside. along that box corner just to reduce the strain on it. Okay, lovely. So the exterior is done. Right, can pop that to one side for the moment and we'll get working on our strap tabs. Okay, here are my strap tabs. So we're going to draw a line along the centre. Let's see how wide they are. Okay. I'm just using a regular pencil for this. Drawing a line along the centre there. And then we're going to fold and press those into the centre. Might as well just use my sleeve board again. It's big enough, isn't it? Okay, give them a little bit of water. So I'm just going to fold each long edge to that centre line and give it a little press. And then the same on this one. And then fold the other side in. So both sides are folded in to that centre line. And a little press just to hold them in place. Lovely. Okay. Now we're going to sew on the right side. So I've got my folds on the back. On the right side, I'm going to sew along each long folded edge. I'm going to increase my stitch length slightly. I'm going to sew at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. And this is mainly decorative, so don't worry too much about back stitching because it's going to be crossed over with another line of stitching. So I'm going along both edges of both strap tabs. Beautiful. Right, we need some hardware. What do we need? We need some triangle rings. My hardware is becoming less and less, so that's good. This time we're progressing through the bag as the hardware and the pieces get less and less. So I'm going to thread these through to the centre. So your raw edges are on the back there. I'm going to thread that through to the back there. I'll sew them both together. And the same for this one. Now I'm going to stitch along the raw edge, short raw edges, just to keep them together. And then I'm going to change my presser foot to a slightly narrower one and sew nearer to the ring as well, just to stop it swiveling around anywhere in use. Okay, so those are secured. The rings are not going anywhere, but when you're using it, it can sort of turn on the strap tab, I find. So I'm going to look for my narrower foot and just swap that over using my adjustable zipper / piping foot, or it could be piping / zipper foot. I never know. Don't know. It's my adjustable foot anyway. And just remove my walking foot, which I don't really need, but I like it because it's nice and wide and gives me extra stability. And I've sort of worked out all my seam allowances based on the markings on the foot, so I can't really swap to a normal foot now, even though I don't need it. Okay. Only because my machine's strong enough, not because you shouldn't be using a walking foot while sewing bags, because actually walking feet are amazing for sewing bags. Right, so I'm just going to sew as close as I can to the ring across the top there. And back stitch. Bit of extra security. I'll do that on both. And back again. There we go. Lovely. So I'm going to trim those threads as close as I can. I always still end up with a loose thread end at the end every time. Not sure how that works really. Okay. Could go a little bit closer on those. There we go. Right, so there's my strap tabs, and I'm going to swap back to my regular, well, not my regular foot really, my walking foot. It's the only thing I really needed that adjustable foot for. But I find it does make a difference being able to get really close to the triangle rings, because there's no way that they are swiveling now. Right. Bear with me, talk amongst yourselves. Have a little drink of tea if you've got some tea. Right, there we go. Sorry about the delay. Okay, lovely. Now we can attach these to our bag. You've got two choices really. You can either attach them onto the exterior, which is fine and completely normal and how most people usually do it. But if you find that your fabric's quite thick, you can alternatively attach it, or attach them to the inside of your lining, and it will have the same effect in the end overall. Okay, so if you've got slightly thick fabric and you're not confident about sewing them into place, then just base them onto your lining. Then when you come to finish your bag and sandwich them into place, they'll be in the right place. So I'm just centering them over the side seam with the ring hanging down inside, making sure that the center of my tab is level with the center of my seam. And hang on now, let me flip that one over. I'll have upside down flowers, but I don't suppose it really matters about upside down flowers, does it? That's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to base those into place, just hold them where they are until we come to do our final construction. Okay, and the other side. Base this second tab into place. I've not done too many lines of stitching there. I've just done a little back stitch either end and one line of basting across the top, because I don't want to put too many holes into my faux leather because it can weaken it. Right, lovely. So that's my exterior done. My lining is done. I just need to pop them together. So I'm going to pop my grab my lining, and I need to turn this right sides out. And I'm going to put my lining inside my exterior. Now decide which side you want your pockets on. Personally, I like my zip pocket to be on the back, so I'm going to match that to the side of the exterior that has got the flap attached. So I've got my flap matching to my zip pocket. And I'm going to just clip that centre back now so that I know that's definitely in the right place where I want it. And then my slip pocket I want on my front, so that's matching to the point where I've got my what have I got? My bridge anchor. I thought I just felt a pin there, so I thought I'd better just double check. No, I think I'm okay. Right, so I will clip the centres again so I know that my pockets are in the right place, matching the right sides. And then I match my side seams. Like so. And then you can sort of work your way round, clipping or pinning, whichever you prefer, around the top edge, and it should all hopefully match up. Just sort of smooth it out nice and even. And this side as well. There we go. Lovely. Right, so now we just need to sew around the entire top of the bag. So we're going to use our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance. Now I've got a flatbed, so I'm going to sew with my presser foot inside the bag, like so. If you've got a free arm though, you'll probably want to pull it out and sew using your free arm, which will be much neater and easier for you. So I'm popping my foot into place, press foot down, start with the needle down so that I can readjust my hands, and I'm just going to sew all the way around the top. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Oh, I've lost the clip already. And overlap a couple of stitches just to be sure. And take your time as you come up to the strap tabs at the side seams. Because they're a little bit thicker, you don't want them to move out of the way. And then as we come to the flap, again take your time, just go over that nice and steady. All the way round, all the way round, back to where we started, and I've back stitched and overlapped a couple of stitches just to be sure. Okay, now if you've sewn using a flatbed like me, you're going to want to just double check that everything has been sewn, nothing's moved out of the way anywhere. No, lovely. Okay, so I'll take all my clips, all my pins, any extra threads, get rid of those. Okay, lovely. So now we want to pull our zip pocket out, and I'm going to give that a little press because we didn't steam it earlier, remember? Should have steamed it earlier, but we didn't, so we'll steam it now. And that will just help us have a nice neat turning gap when we close it. Okay. And we can remove those stitches now. Get my stitch unpicker. I've probably put it somewhere. So this is not the stitch unpicker I had earlier, but it's an unpicker. I seem to have 3 up here. And of course you can never find the one that you're looking for. Yeah. I'm sure I'm not alone in that one. Right, so just unpick these stitches, and that should leave a nice line of stitch holes behind, same as we've had before. Okay, so now what we're going to do is very gently reach through, grab one of our, so we're reaching through that turning gap, grab one of our bottom corners of the exterior and just gently turn it through. My hardware out, which is good because that reduced the bulk then. Just take your time on this, and I like to sort of keep turning. Ah, I knew I had a pin. Where is that pin then? Hang on, before I carry on turning, there is a pin. Ah, there it is. Aha. I did think I had a pin. Turns out I was right. If I could go back on the video and tell myself. Never mind. Got it now. Okay, there we go. Nice and easy. Very gently. Just reaching inside and pushing those bottom corners out. Make sure those are nice and proud. The side tabs, lovely. Okay, I can tuck the lining inside, and if you've got a fabric that you can press, then now is a great time to press it. If not, then I like to just have a little finger roll. Okay. So because I can't press it, what I'm going to do my top stitching first and then close my turning gap. Okay, if you've got fabric that you can press, then close your turning gap first, like it says in the pattern, and then you can do your top stitching. But I find that if I leave my turning gap open, then sometimes I can sort of tug my lining back down inside a little bit easier. So I'm just finger roll and tuck and tug and get that all nice and sorted, and add a clip. Now when we're doing this final top stitch, our strap tabs will sit out and not be included in the top stitch. We need them kind of sticking up so we can attach our handle onto. So I'm just reaching through the turning gap and just pushing this seam out nice and proud, so it's nice and even all the way along. There we go, nice little finger roll all the way round. Tug that down into place. There we go. And our flap will also not be included in the top stitching. Okay, so I've increased my stitch length slightly. And where am I going to start? Let's have a think. I'm probably going to start somewhere round the back here, near the strap tab, and sew all the way around the outside. Okay, so as you're sewing, keep your flap out and keep your strap tabs out. Now, as I said, because I've got a flatbed machine, I'm going to sew inside the bag. So because I want to be sewing on the exterior fabric, I'm actually going to turn my bag inside out to do this top stitching. If you've got a free arm, you don't need to do that. Ah, I felt another pin then, I'm sure. Yes, in that bottom corner. Aha. So it's a good job that I haven't closed my turning gap yet. How have I managed that then? Both bottom corners have pins in them. I have no idea. I'll have to watch the video back, see where I've managed that. Okay. Right, so I've turned my bag inside out. I'm going to have a little wiggle to get this under the presser foot. There we go. So starting with my needle down again so that I can readjust my hands if needed. And sew around the entire top. Take your time on this one. I'm sewing at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the top. Okay, just take your time. Ease this through the machine. And coming up to where the strap tabs are again, just take my time. Get over the hump of that strap tab and carry on. Okay, just going to pull my front thread through to the back before I go any further, and then I know that that's nice and neat and out of the way there. Okay, and that's the beauty of starting with your needle down, is that you can stop and do all these kind of things without it affecting you or making you go a bit wobbly. Lovely. Okay. There we go. Right, just trim these threads. Lovely. Right. So now we need to close our turning gap. We might as well do that while my bag's inside out, seeing as it's here already. So just fold those seam allowances under that turning gap. If you find it's a little bit misshapen, I think, then just give it a little tug. You can always give it a little press. Just fold those seam allowances under. Use some clips, I think. Match them up as best you can. Okay. Go all the way along. Okay, lovely. Then we can sew this closed. You can use a ladder stitch if you are a hand stitcher, or you can use your machine on a very close top stitch. I'm using a scant 1/8 of an inch, or sort of a 1.5 to 2mm seam allowance. As long as you don't go off the edge. We'll get a neater finish with a hand ladder stitch, of course, but I absolutely loathe hand sewing. So I am always a machine stitch kind of person. Right, lovely. And tuck that back into place, and then I can turn it out, and my bag's nearly finished, very nearly finished. We've got a usable bag, although at the moment it is a clutch. I've got no handle. It's a rather large clutch bag. There we go. Okay, double check that I haven't got any more pins in there after my last two. No, we're fine. Right, lovely. So that does up like so. Nice. That gives us our nice slouchy shape. I like that. We just need to sew our handle now. Okay, so why don't you pop that somewhere where you can admire it and see it, and we'll get started on our handle. So finally, all we need to do is our handle, and what I've done is I have placed my exterior and my lining right sides together. I've matched them up. I did this off camera because I cut it in a certain way, and then when I put it down it wasn't quite right, so I've turned it around. But I've clipped all the way around, and then I've left a little gap here, well, as big as I can make it really, before that's on the apex of the curve there, and that's where it curves back in again. And I've added some pins to remind me to leave that as the turning gap so I can turn this handle right sides out. So we're going to use our regular construction stitch length, and actually I think I might mark the seam allowance on here the same as we did before, just so that we can be sure that that is nice and even on both sides. Just want to make sure, just on these sort of cornery curvy bits, just to make sure that they turn at the same time on both and they're nice and even, if that makes sense. 1, 2, 3, 3/8 of an inch is the seam allowance, or 1 centimetre, so just mark that. Hang on, I've lost my mark. It's the joy of doing it in pencil. I don't know if you can hear, but it's absolutely tamping down with rain outside at the moment, and I haven't really got a ceiling in here, and it's sort of a just straight up onto the roof instead of a ceiling, so it sounds quite loud here. I hope it's not too loud for you. Okay, right, I'll just mark this side as well, so I can have a nice even ends. There we go. I'm not doing all the way round for this one, literally just where this angle is on the side there. Okay, beautiful. Right, so pop my bag to one side for the minute. Let's get going. I might start with my area of basting stitches, my turning gap. I'm using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so I will start with my longest stitch length, start with my needle down, and sew to the other side of my turning gap, change back down to my regular stitch length, and I'll do a little bit of back stitching here, and then continue round the rest of the handle. So as I come to that pivot point that I marked earlier, just lift my presser foot and pivot, and pivot again. Lift my presser foot and pivot, and then as I come to that pivot point again that I marked, oh dear, whoops, pivot on that point, and hopefully they should be nice and even at the end then when I turn it right sides out. If by this point you're thoroughly fed up and you just want to get your bag finished, then you can always put a regular rectangle shaped handle on, or a bit of webbing or something. That would still look beautiful, but it would save a little bit of time for you. Or if you're making for markets or fairs and time is of the essence, you could always do that as well. I do like this nice big wide shoulder strap. It's very comfortable to use, but if you are bound by time, then you can always change it out. It's your bag, there's no rules. Right, so we're coming back to where we started, and I'm going to add some back stitches here. There we go, lovely. nice and neat. Trim these threads. Now we need to trim a bit of this excess away. So I'll start by trimming my curves using my pinking shears. If you haven't got pinking shears, then you can just notch these. So I've left my turning gap unpinked because we need a little bit of something in there just to hang on to when we turn it through. And round this curve. And all the way along this edge this time. Something very vicious about pinking shears, isn't there? There we go. And then we'll trim these corners straight across and then back a bit more. And straight across, back a bit more. Take the end off there as well while I'm here. And then the same. Okay. And then I'm just going to take a little triangle out of here. Can't quite do it with those scissors. I think I might need to look at sharpening some of my scissors. Right, so on those inside corners, no, still no. I might have to watch the video back and see which scissors I used on the other ones. For all I know, it could be the same scissors and they're just not working again. Right, taking those little triangles out of those inside corners there. Just help it sit nice and neat when we turn it out. A little bit long-winded doing these clips and things, but it does make a difference. It's worth it if you have got the time to do them. One of these pairs of scissors must work. I think it's the tips, because they're all fine apart from getting right into those tips. It could be that I just need to buy myself some new scissors because they are all getting on a bit now. I think the last time I bought myself some scissors was at retreat, and that was probably about, oh gosh, it could have been pre-COVID, you know, it could have been about 4 years ago. No longer than that now. I probably am due to have a little bit of a sharpen. There we go. Got there in the end. Now, I do have a scissor sharpener downstairs actually, so maybe I'll try and remember to take my scissors down and sharpen them. Okay, lovely. So let's give that a little steam press where our turning gap is. Little spritz and a bit of heat to provide some steam. Lovely, very nice. Now, just to make sure it's going to be as neat as possible, I'm just going to take this little extra bit of stabilizer, this fleece, out of the turning gap here. Well, I say I am, but apparently my scissors are having other ideas today. Just trim this little bit extra out, back to the stitching line, just so that it reduces the bulk in that when we turn it through and try and turn those bits under. Okay. There we go. Right, now comes the fun part, turning this through. rid of my extra little triangles of fabric. Oh, of course I can't turn it through because I haven't taken the basting stitches out yet. Let's take the basting stitches out first, shall we? It's the simplest things, isn't it, sometimes? Just unpick these basting stitches from the turning gap. I wonder how I was going to turn it out then, with no turning gap. I guess I hadn't really thought that far ahead. There we go. Okay. And we'll turn this through that turning gap. Again, it's easiest if you sort of roll that chunky bit and then encourage it out that way. Still takes a few minutes of concentrated turning, but it is a little bit easier to fit through this narrowest part. If you've got hands that are slightly achy, then it is helpful to find a friend or a young neighbour. Unfortunately, I don't have a young neighbour here to help me with this, otherwise I would be going and asking for some help. We are coming. Maybe my spoon would help. Let's try my spoon. That did help, you know. Maybe all I needed was a spoon in my hand. There we go. Once we get that chunkiest bit through, it's not too bad then. We're getting there. Gently, gently. Easy does it. There's no rush on this. Well, I don't know, there might be a rush on it. You might have a deadline. I always find it's best not to sew when I've got a deadline though, because I don't do very well. Although somehow I do always find myself sewing when I've got a deadline, so that's poor planning on my part. I don't sew very well, but I am very productive with a deadline. Maybe I need some false deadlines, pretend deadlines. Maybe that would work. Right, there we go. There's one end out. I don't want to go through the corners. I'm just trying to turn them out enough to make them sit proud. Okay. And the second corner, or the second end, just gently, gently, gently pushing that out. And I think the rain started again. There we go. And I'm running my spoon around the inside of those curves, help them to sit out nice. There we go. Lovely. Right, we got there in the end. Just going to pop that in and work on this one corner of that. There we go. Very nice, very neat. Okay, great. So we are going to steam this. I'm going to see if I can maybe fold along that turning gap first before we steam it, so that as I'm steaming it, it's going into the right place. There we go. So we'll just fold under along that line of stitches. There we go. That's looking a little bit neater, isn't it? And give it a bit of a spritz. I might have just spritz onto my pattern, so that'll be fun when I come to add my notes, type up my notes. There we go. So on this end is nice and easy. It's the one with the turning gap, not quite so easy. So I'll do the bits that I can get to easily first. There we go. And then make sure that's nice and neat. Lovely. Okay. Beautiful. Put my little sleeve board away and it's time for top stitching. So we'll increase our stitching slightly. And I'm going to top stitch around the entire outside. Just trying to keep those edges rolled under. Let's think. I'll start on the straight bit at the end because that will be hidden in the fold over. Now, like we did for the flap, just take your time on this, okay? There's no need to rush. We're going all the way around the outside using 1/8 of an inch of 3mm seam allowance. Pivoting at the corners with my needle down, I press a foot up. And as I come up to this turning gap, make sure that it's folded under neatly and all the layers and edges are intact together, and as I top stitch that should close that turning gap. And nearly back to where we started. I've left my thread tails long and I'll worry about those afterwards. And pivot again. There we go. Lovely. Now I've got no pairs of scissors. Right, okay. So I think I might pull these threads through to the back where I can, because this fabric, the lining fabric, is very busy, so it should hopefully disguise any knots or starts or bits and pieces like that. Right, there's one through to the back. I think I might need my needle again for this other one. Let's have a look. Yes, need my needle again. That's okay, as long as we remember where I put it. Where did I put it? In my pin cushion. There we go. Nearly lost it. There we go. Right, let's push that through to the back. And I can tie these threads off. And then all that we've got to do is add our hardware and snap our handle onto our bag, and that's it, finished. Easily done. Or easily finished rather. There we go. We've done the hard bit, haven't we? But sewing the bag. Okay, so we're going to add a hook onto each end, and again it's your choice how you sew this and how you have it, whether you have your lining fabric as the right side with the tab flipped over like so, or the other way round and have your exterior fabric through onto the lining. It's really your choice, and actually these swivel hooks do swivel, so it doesn't matter which way you want it. You can wear it either way, it just matters which way you'd like your tabs to sit. I think I will do mine like this, I think. And I'm just going to sew those into place. Excuse me. Just do a little line of stitch in there to secure that. I might come back and add some rivets later. I think this navy and gold would look very nice with some rivets. So I think I might come back and add a couple of rivets just to enhance that. There we go. And I'll do the same the other end, and you'll see how much to turn over on these tabs because they just sit naturally. You don't need a measurement, just until it sits naturally is fine. And start with a needle down again on these. I've sewn over and I'm going to sew back on myself so that I've gone over that a couple of times. Trim these threads. There we go. Lovely. So we can retrieve our bag now. Ta-da! And this is the point where you decide which way you want your handle to face, or which way out you want your handle to be. It doesn't really matter because you can flip it over if you change your mind. Attach that on, and there's our half-pint hobo all done. I really like the slouch on this. I think that's got a good slouchiness level, and over time this faux leather will wear and soften up slightly. I think this is a great bag for using those smaller cuts of fabric that you've got, you're hanging on to. Anything where you want a little bit of a feature on the flap, or you could have your feature on your main fabric and use a solid. This is a great gift, good for markets. As I said, you can easily shorten the time of this one by changing out the handle, and again the flap, you can easily shorten the time by turning that into a rectangle and just adding your hardware. I absolutely love this bag. I think it's great, and I hope that the recipient likes this one. I'm fairly certain they'll love it, but if not, I know somebody who will love it, and I will gladly take it back. Do you find that when you're making gifts? Sometimes you think, oh, I hope they don't like it so I can have it back. I hope you make one of these half-pint hobos. If you do, please tag me at themakespace.uk or give me a shout by email, help@themakespace.uk. Thank you for sewing with me. Bye bye.